When Super Mario Odyssey was released in 2017, it had the gameplay loop of earlier Mario 3D platformers, but sped up that gameplay loop based on how quickly you could get the power moons. Wizards and Warriors took a gameplay loop from the 80s and sped it up the same way that Super Mario Odyssey did. Wizards and Warriors is an action platforming game developed by Rare and published by Acclaim in 1987. During this period at Rare, the object of the company was to release a lot of different games for the NES. Other games that you may have heard of that came out of Rare at this time include games like Battletoads and RC Pro-Am. In this game, you take control of Kuros on his quest to save the princess and defeat the evil wizard, Malkiel. I first played this game when I was in kindergarten at a friend's house. I especially remember the music helping to set the tone for each playthrough. Playing that heroic tune to get you pumped up to start, but bringing it back down for boss battles and cave stages. While I never finished the game as a kid, I did track down a copy of the cart to add to my collection as an adult. Playing the game now, I'm figuring out more of the game mechanics. As a kid, I never figured out how a lot of the magic items worked, but I loved their corny names like the Dagger of Throwing and the Boots of Lava Walk. When I was a kid, these felt like natural tools for a knight. But now, Kuros feels less like a knight and more like the protagonist of a spy movie set in medieval times, with the roundabout way that you enter the castle and the items and tools that you use, like the Boots of Force and the Cloak of Darkness. As a kid, the furthest I made it into this game was the stage where you need to scale the walls of the castle in order to get a key to enter. This is usually where my modern playthroughs end as well, but there have been a few times where I have pressed forward, gotten through this stage, and finished the game. It's not a difficult game to finish after that stage, because the player is allowed unlimited continues. So in any case, you either beat the game or give up. The game never forces you to start over. Before playing a new game as a kid, I would usually examine the manual on the way home from the rental store, or while waiting for a turn for the television. Since I played this at a friend's house, I didn't get to do that, or I may have figured out all the mechanics back when I was a kid. There's actually a lot of lore in this game, but it's mostly found in the manual. It tells the story of a wizard named Malkiel, so great and well versed in the ways of magic that he's responsible for tutoring and teaching the famous Merlin in the ways of magic. Alas, as time passes, Malkiel has become cynical with age and has taken to capturing the damsels of the kingdom, including the princess, and holding them in and around Castle Ironspire. While the castle used to be an old proving ground for wizards and warriors, now Malkiel makes sport of those who enter and attempt to free the captured damsels. While there are some remnants of his older good magic, such as gems, weapons, and magic items, the creatures, caves, and forests are all under the influence of Malkiel's evil magic. While many have entered, most have perished. Others have been driven mad with greed, enhanced by Malkiel's evil magic, and now obstruct the path of those that come after. You play as Kuros, the famous knight and warrior who wields the thrice-blazed weapon, Brightsword. In your past adventures, you have become versed in the different magic items, potions, and weaponry of the land of Elrond. Now the kingdom's hope falls to Kuros as he makes an attempt at saving the captured damsels from the fallen wizard Malkiel. When starting up this game, the first thing that I notice is that it has an attract mode, but the tune only plays once instead of looping like other games do. From time to time, I will set up a home arcade where I set up as many consoles as I can at the same time. Because the music for this ends but the visuals repeat, I usually leave this game running as my NES monitor. When getting into the game, you can see that the sprite work is on par for the time, especially when compared to other games that came out that year, like The Legend of Zelda, Castlevania, or Punch-Out! Where this game really shines is in the bold choice of color used to create the world. Most enemies have a single color used when creating them, like a purple bee or a red eagle. This makes single-color enemies pop out when compared to the multicolored and often muted colors of the backgrounds. This starts out great in the forest stages, but in the later stages, sometimes the backgrounds and enemies can blend together. Sometimes this is intentional, like when a black face is hiding in the walls of a black background stage. But other times it isn't, like when you're trying to avoid a red enemy while climbing an orange wall. The first stage is called the Forest of Elrond, and it's an ideal tutorial to set the pace and teach the player all that they need to know about how to play. The map communicates to the player that they will not end the stage on the same elevation that they started on. This is reinforced when the stage begins. Kuros enters the forest through a gray door and falls a few pixels. The screen scroll lets the player know that it is safe to go down. From here, the player is free to explore the outside of the stage. If you move to the right, the most likely option, then you will find a blue key and a blue door. By getting the key, it is added to your inventory and you can now enter the blue door. You will notice a purple chest that is closed. After making your way up the tree, you will find a purple key. To the right is a red knight asking for 100 gems. You cannot defeat this knight because he has the red potion effect, making him invulnerable. Below him is a purple chest that is now open because you have the purple key in your inventory. Inside it is the Dagger of Throwing, a projectile weapon. As you keep exploring, you will find the red key. Further explore to learn the effects of potions. Red for invulnerability, purple for an increased jump height, and blue for a speed boost. Keep gathering magic items and gems until you have 100. Then you can pass the night, navigate down to the caves below, and find the giant skull boss. At the end of this stage, you rescue a damsel and move on to the next area. This gameplay loop of exploring, platforming, discovering an item, that being a key or a magic item, then exploring with the new item, platforming somewhere else, and discovering something new is the engagement hook of this game. Other games released earlier in the 80s include this same gameplay loop, the most famous being Metroid. There you explore the map, platforming as you go, then collect a power-up. This is followed by backtracking to all of the places that you can now go with that power-up, leading to new areas to explore, new platforms to traverse, and new discoveries of new powers. Wizards & Warriors speeds up that loop by using smaller self-contained stages. This increases the pacing of the gameplay loop and the pace of the overall game, in the same way that the pace of Super Mario Odyssey is increased because of how often you can collect a power moon. Cap off each stage with a combat-centered boss fight, and the player is almost always engaged with the game. The game also cycles through two different emphasis on the game regularly. The first, third, fifth, and sixth stages lean the challenge more toward platforming, with smaller stages that require more precise jumps from the player. While the second, fourth, and seventh stages are all about exploring, with larger stages challenging the player to memorize the stage layout and backtracking with the correct items. When entering a new stage, the player will begin by exploring, trying to find a key and gems. While exploring, the player is incentivized to gather all of the gems that they can, because while it is known that gems are needed to get past the Red Knights, it isn't known how many gems are required for each stage. You can gather gems by touching them with Kuros or hitting them with a projectile weapon. While exploring, some gems may be out of reach, or there could be a fork in the path and some gems will be left behind. Not all of the gems will be collected upon the first pass of a stage. In this way, the gems act as breadcrumbs, showing the player what parts of the stage have been explored and which ones have not been explored yet. As you explore, the player can also note unopened chests and colored doors. These will need to be stored in memory and returned to later with the proper key. Combining a stage centered around exploring and also centered around platforming isn't impossible. But during this early time in video games, vertical platforming hadn't been explored as much now as it did then. I really believe that the placement of keys, magic items, and gems really lift the level design. But this somewhat new foray into vertical platforming sections may be just as much of a hindrance to the level design. There are no bottomless pits in this game. Kuros only loses a life when his life bar is drained to 0. Instead, you may be traversing platforms over lava or treetops, trying not to fall to the levels below. But that's the key. You're trying to avoid falling to a lower part of the stage. The vertical stage design sections in Wizards & Warriors can be compared to a Mario game with 3 levels. The first level is the lower section of Wizards & Warriors. The second Mario level is the vertical climb in Wizards & Warriors. And the third Mario level is like the upper section of Wizards & Warriors. In a more traditional platformer, the player always moves from left to right, avoiding pits and obstacles along the way. If the player fails and loses a life, they will be taken back to the start of that course, where they are allowed to try again. Here, if a jump is missed in the upper section of Wizards & Warriors, the player isn't reset to the start of that section. Instead, they fall back to the lower part of the stage. This is like being reset to the first Mario level instead of back to the start of the third Mario level. Modern vertical platforming stages are designed to mitigate loss of progress when falling, but at the time of this game's release, falling indicated starting the ascent all over again. Not that the developers didn't try to address this issue. The Potion of Levitation helps with platforming by giving Kuros a boost before he jumps. And the Feather of the Featherfall slows the descent of falling in an attempt to help you correct as soon as possible. After exploring and platforming, the player is rewarded with progression keys and magic items. Some items will help with combat, others platforming, still others exploring. After finding a new item, the player can learn how to use it and then begin exploring again, this time aided with the new addition to their inventory. The inventory is persistent between stages, and different items can be obtained on different playthroughs, increasing the replayability of this game. 4 inventory slots are permanent upgrades, while the last slot can be changed out for whatever may be helpful at the time. Some items, like the Boots of Lava Walk, are only useful for one stage in the game, and can be switched out for better fitting items when you progress to the next stage. Finally, the combat. Kuros begins the game with only a suit of armor and a sword. Magic items can help with combat, like the Shield of Protection and the Dagger of Throwing. But the combat really isn't the hook of the game, because of the very generous continue system. There's no penalty for death in this game, unless you're in a boss fight. If at any point during a stage Kuros loses all of his health, he will throw a fit and give up. After he dusts himself off and takes a deep breath, he will rise to his feet and continue on his way. No change to inventory and no progression lost. But if Kuros throws a fit while fighting a boss, the boss will take advantage of this and reset the boss fight while Kuros isn't looking. If you lose all of your lives and just continue, you are granted 3 more lives in exchange for all of your points. I really appreciate this system. Without it, I may never have finished this game, like so many of the other NES games that I love. I still try to stay alive as long as I can when I'm playing, but towards the end of the game, the number of enemies that are constantly spawning and rushing Kuros, along with some rooms that are full of invincible skulls that fire projectiles at you, is enough to make anyone lay down and throw a fit for a while. Overall, this game is well paced, with a constantly engaging gameplay loop that will keep the player going right up to stage 6, the exterior of the castle. While the problem that I spoke of above with the vertical stage layout is annoying, it's not bad enough to stop a run until you get to this stage. The entire stage is a vertical climb. The platforms are small, and some will periodically retract into the castle, causing Kuros to plummet downward. There have been many times where I get close to the top, but then fall all the way back down to the ground. I feel so deflated that my playthrough will end there, but if I stick it out past this stage, then I will usually finish the rest of the game. One other pace breaker is just a nitpick by comparison, and it has an easy fix. The second boss, the giant bat, should be swapped with the giant spider boss found later in the game. The giant bat seems too difficult to be that early in the game and is somewhat of a roadblock early on, whereas the giant spider found in the late game is usually beaten on the first try, often without taking any damage. The fix here is easy, just swap their placement in the game. I really liked this game as a kid, and I recommend playing it as an adult. Candidly yours, 8-Bit Dad 7DC, better known as Seth.